Today is the big day for the East Coast where we could see a couple of strong tornadoes. This is going to be a tornado driven moderate risk, as well as it's pretty likely that we are going to see some catastrophic damaging winds across our main mid Atlantic risk area. This does have potential to see some widespread 80-mile-an-hour gust. Hail isn't going to be as much of a risk though, except down in more southeastern parts of our risk. Down there, we have more favorable thermodynamics that would support that. But overall, the more north you go, the less likely you are to see hail. Down in this southern area, I wouldn't really expect to see anything over 2 inches in diameter. But of course, the main threats are going to be damaging winds and tornadoes. And the craziest thing about this is that this is going to be a boom or bust setup. And on top of that, there's going to be over 90 million people in our risk area. So very big day, lots of people under risk, and it's a boom or bust setup. So the main thing that's happening and even making this a possibility is going to be a textbook negative tilted trough right here. This is kind of the trough axis right now that's going to be ejecting across this region today. And not only is that going to lend a lot of favorable ingredients getting advected upward and northward, that's including moisture and instability, but it's also going to lend some of the craziest shear values this region has ever seen. Now, a big thing about this is that we're going to see multiple ejections over there. We really have three main pulses. We have the one that's going to eject further up in the northeast, not going to play as big of a role. That's going to be the first one. We have a second one that's going to be our mid-Atlantic ejection. This would be probably mid-morning to early afternoon. Then we have our third guy, which is going to kind of round the bottom, and that would be for the later into night hours. That one's not going to play as much of a role because by then a lot of our storms should be over the Atlantic and our risk is going to be done. Then also we have a prefrontal trough. I think this prefrontal trough is actually the most important because that is why we're going to see widespread morning convection across this sector. And this morning convection is why this boom or bust is even a play. This morning convection could very well wipe out all of the ingredients, and this could make it just a very, very messy day. If that were to happen, our damaging wind potential and also tornado potential would be limited significantly. So really, it would become more of a nowcasting event. It's still going to be very much a nowcasting event, but if that were to happen, we'd be looking at a couple of areas that didn't completely have their ingredients depleted and still could have the possibility of a couple of discrete storms. Even at 700 millibars, we're seeing a fairly strong ejection right out here. Of course, we're going to have all those ingredients evecting northward, and it won't take much. We're going to have pulses at 500 millibars and pulses at 700 millibars that are really going to help to create morning advection. I don't think morning advection is a question. It's definitely going to be there. It's just more about the timing of it and where it's going to be and if it's going to wipe our environment completely clean. Another thing with this is that over the past couple of days, it looks like it has been trending that our line is going to break apart a little bit. Our front is going to slow down significantly. By 15Z a couple of days ago, it was showing that our cold front was already going to be pretty much in the Atlantic, but now it's showing that it's going to be barely in western North Carolina. If this were to happen, if our front stays back and our line of thunderstorms decays quite a bit over the Appalachian Mountains, that would be another thing that would allow this area in front of it to destabilize quite a bit more. That's when we're going to see that moderate risk verify, or at least it's going to have the highest probability to verify. The NAM still likes this solution, and the NAM is showing something that would kind of lean more towards seeing that moderate risk verify. But other models like the HRRR are starting to disagree. The NAM is also expecting a very, very strong moisture plume. We're seeing low to mid 60s dew points all the way up in southern Pennsylvania. That's way higher than expected a couple of days ago, than across what's going to be expected to be our main region. So it's southern South Carolina, all the way up into parts of Maryland, Delaware, even including the Washington, D.C., DMV area. We're seeing mid 60s dew points really all the way through that. Then on top of that, our instability plume is really going to follow that same path. Now the NAM is showcasing that we're going to see widespread probably anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram, even in some more bullish areas showing close to 2,000. And specifically in the south, I don't think the southeastern portion of this risk has been given enough credit recently. I think our thermodynamics there are going to be very good. There's the possibility of seeing isolated cape in some areas up above 3,000, the possibility of seeing 3 cape in that region above 150, and our shear parameters are still going to be plenty good in that region. Also has the highest probability in the morning, at least, of seeing more of a broken line of embedded supercells. This is an area where we could see strong tornadoes, hail, and not as much of a damaging wind threat. It would be quite a bit more isolated, but with those cells that do get going, it's definitely going to be still pretty significant in my opinion. So that's what's going on there. Now we're going to move on to our simulated reflectivity, kind of showing what that might look like. So here we go. Here's our line. It's going to actually probably, from at least what I'm seeing now, the maintenance of this line going into the night before is looking very solid. So there is a possibility that it might be able to survive the Appalachians. Not a guarantee though, and a lot of models until the HRRR recently have been leaning towards that it won't. We see things slow down quite a bit, that main line decays, and we see kind of more of a activity back up along that cold front. Down here in the southeast, we're seeing a bit more of a broken up line. Ingredients in front of this are going to be quite good. I think northern Florida, South Carolina, Georgia in front of this are going to be an area to watch, specifically in the morning. And then, of course, the big thing, we see all of this morning convection. Now, what's happening here is that, yeah, it looks like it's probably going to wipe out some of the ingredients, but at least we're still getting a decent plume of moisture and instability in this area because it hasn't completely wiped out our warm sector. And if we did see something like this where our line kind of slows down and this morning convection don't collide, there's also a potential that in that same area that was giving our morning convection from that prefrontal trough, it could decay as we go later in today. And we could actually see a couple of prefrontal cells with that. There would be the possibility of all hazards of severe weather for sure, but even all the way up into mid Pennsylvania, if this were to be able to happen, we're seeing a pretty clear environment minus the area that had the morning convection. That would be right up along the coast. I think right up along the coast is actually going to see a decent chance of a lot of ingredients getting eaten up. And then also, the more north you go, then we're getting more northern Atlantic air kind of evected on land. So right up along the coast, probably not the most favorable region. That's going to be more cool, dry stuff, not seeing as much instability or moisture there. But if this were to be how it play out, this is what things would look like by early to mid-afternoon. Even going into the evening hours, this line or QLCS still hasn't pushed all the way off into the Atlantic. The possibility of producing damaging winds would still be there at that point, including QLCS spin up tornadoes. Also, the possibility of a confluence band looks quite possible. We have quite a bit of flow coming from the Atlantic, and it looks like we have quite a bit of flow coming from the Gulf even. When these come together, can shoot them in a straight line, maybe confluence there. That confluence could be a bad thing. We see more convection in front of this line eating up the environment, or we see prefrontal supercells. So there's definitely still a lot of questions left with this, which is kind of crazy because at this point, we're not even 14 hours away from this when this event is going to be in full swing, and morning convection could be an issue. Could see prefrontals, could see a environment that's completely gone, or we're still seeing a pretty pristine environment in front of a QLCS where we could see maybe a couple of strong tornadoes, damaging winds. The main thing here for damaging winds is that our low-level jet is going to be absolutely ripping. Very rarely do we see kinematics like this over the region. Widespread 60 to 65 knots at 850 millibars. The downdrafts with this are not going to have to try very hard to bring that to the surface. So damaging winds in play, strong tornadoes in play, hail in play, more in the south though, but also a pretty big fail mode. Now we're going to explore that fail mode even more. Let's take a peek at the HRRR. This is kind of what the HRRR has been saying in the most recent run. Look at all that morning convection just eating up that line. Also, the line survives the Appalachian Mountains. And instead of at 16Z being all the way back here in western North Carolina, it's now close to central North Carolina. These collide, the environment's pretty much gone at this point. Very much lowered ceiling. This would be pretty sloppy. Still not going to completely get rid of the chance of seeing a couple of spin ups. I mean, we are going to see a lot of mergers if this were to happen. Still not going to get rid of the point or the possibility of seeing some damaging ones either. It's just the possibility of seeing this event really reach its maximum potential is going to be significantly lowered if we were to see an outcome like this. Not guaranteed though, there's still a decent possibility that we see the other outcome on the NAM. This is just going to be kind of a waiting game where we're going to have to wait and see what actually happens. And the last thing, this is just a weather sounding from if we did get the better environment with the NAM, that morning convection isn't going to be as much of an issue in the sounding. We're seeing 68 over 64. This is a pretty well mixed elevated mix layer. Decent bit of mixed layer cape up here. Still QoCS mode, maybe a couple of prefrontals that would have more of a hail risk. So not as much to worry about there on the hail level. Our lapse rates aren't super high. That's something that's more characteristic of eastern threats, specifically in the mid-Atlantic. Would like to see them a little closer to 7 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, but 6.5 is what we're working with, and that's probably going to be enough. Winds increasing with strength. Well, in this one, they're actually not increasing with strength because we're going to have our low jet really, really ramped up down here, but still some curvature in our winds, big curvature in our hodograph. And with that, that's going to land 450 SRH in around 50 knots of effective inflow, 75 knots of effective shear, no problem with maintenance with these storms at all. And these are working with, we already went over 64 dew points and probably 1,000 Cape. These storms are no doubt going to be surface based, except maybe if you go up to the north with all of that air mixing in from the Atlantic, from the more stable Atlantic where there's not as much moisture, not as much heat, there is a possibility that as we go later in today, some of those storms up north become a bit more elevated. So that's something to look out for. But I think the main things we're going to have to look for are in the morning, southeast, and then as we go later in today, we're really looking at how the morning convection is doing. Is that completely screwing up the environment? Did our line even survive the Appalachian Mountains? And then we make that decision from there. And then from there, we're looking at the mid-Atlantic and northeast. And then after the northeast kind of trickles down in activity, I think is a possibility looking at the mid-Atlantic again. I think that's going to be how today goes, but definitely going to be a wait and see game. And if that morning convection works out, if this big line survives the Appalachian Mountains, very different scenario than from what I'm talking here. Much lower echelon event, something you'd see probably more out of a slight risk than a moderate risk. But if we don't, very high ceiling on this event. Definitely going to watch out. Definitely going to want to be on your now casting game for this event.